impact and value derived from the UK SPF and the REAPF programmes. And secondly, to note the government's priorities and provide comment on the Council's approach for distributing funds for the 2025-26 UK Shared Prosperity Fund extension. So I'll hand over to Councillor Thompson to introduce. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Chair, and good evening, everyone. I'm really pleased to be presenting the paper before the committee tonight. The UK Shared Prosperity Fund and the Rural England Fund have been running now for 3 years, and we thought it was really important that as that sort of tranche of money comes to the close at the end of March, that it was important that we set out in detail how the money that we've received has been spent. And I hope you can really see from the paper before you that we have been really helping our communities and residents go greener faster, improving our carbon footprint, as well as supporting our businesses across the district. At a time when resources have been so scarce, we have been very grateful to have received £1.745 million to fund great projects throughout our district. And our officers have done an excellent job over the last 3 years in ensuring that all of this money has got out through the door to such a wide range of projects. And I'll talk a little bit about the variety of those projects in a moment. As part of the terms and conditions of the grant, we set up a partnership board which comprised of representatives from a wide range of sectors and interests from, for example, the Winchester Bid, Hampshire Cultural Trust, the Country Landowners Association, parish councils, as well as reps from our universities and colleges. This board played a crucial role in ensuring that the view of a wide range of interests and places were considered in the selection and delivery of projects. And I would like to thank all who came along to the meetings and made their views clear. They were a great help. Members of the board were also instrumental in coming forward with projects, as well as ensuring that our call-outs for projects had a wider reach than we could possibly have done on the council. So over the 3 years that the UK Shared Prosperity Fund has been running, we have supported 32 projects covering the themes set out in our investment plan, and the fund is on track to be fully spent. In addition, the Rural England Fund has supported a total of 25 projects, again fully funded, and are also on track to be fully spent. So a little about some of these projects. On page 15, you can see, let me just go to it, there is a chart, a pie chart. You can see that we've supported a total of 20 carbon reduction projects, including 7 EV charging stations and new foot and cycle paths. We helped 280 residents gain qualifications in retrofit and alternative energy installations, as well as digital communications through our 3 green skills projects. I hope you will have read some of the very positive comments from businesses and community centres as a result of their successful bid for grant funding. 22 of our businesses across our district were helped with funding in sectors ranging from childcare to landscape gardening, sport and the creative industries. And the pie chart on page 17 shows the wide range of sectors that have been supported. So whether it's solar PVs on community buildings, EV charging points in pub car parks, new interpretation signage to the Nunnaminster just down here in Winchester, or coffee roasting machines, these 2 funds have been at the forefront of ensuring that these projects were able to go ahead. And some of them have helped kickstart other projects for the future, which I think is absolutely fantastic. Right from the start, we had a strong district focus and were determined that we would use this grant to help residents, communities and businesses across our district. And the map on page 19 is a useful reminder of where that funding went. And before I close, just one final point. Some of these projects have been match funded. This match funding has ensured that for every pound spent from the fund, it has unlocked another from local businesses, communities and other organisations. We have effectively doubled our money. The impact to the local community and economy is already significant and will continue. And I'm absolutely delighted that the government have confirmed that we will receive a further UK Shared Prosperity Grant of £327,146 in April of this year, to be spent by the end of March 2026. And again, I would just like to pay tribute to our own staff in the local economy team who have really gone out of their way to ensure that we have spent all this money. Some councils, we know, have had to give money back to the government, and we were quite clear we did not want to do that. And I would also like to thank again the members of the Partnership Board who were so helpful in giving us guidance on the selection of projects that had come forward. So thank you very much, and we're willing to take questions.
Thank you very much, Councillor Thompson. Councillor White.
So just referring to the graph on page 20 about the Rural England Prosperity Fund by ward, and just wondering, there's quite a lot of variation between the amounts allocated to the different wards, and also some wards, like my ward, Central Meon Valley, isn't on the graph. So I was just wondering why that might be. Is it because there weren't appropriate projects that came forward from Central Meon Valley, or was it something to do with the process? And whether there's anything ward councillors could do to help that process?
Yes, it is a bit of a shame that they're not on the list, but we did very much rely on parish councils and ward councillors as well, other organisations within a ward to actually come forward with projects. And if there wasn't a project available for us to support, and it also had to fit into a quite tight criteria, which actually was laid down by the government, the previous government. So I would encourage the parish councils in your area to, when we look at the extra funding we've got coming up for next year, to see whether there are any projects that, you know, could usefully tap into this grant.
Thank you. I think Councillor Chamberlain was the first.
Thank you, Chair. My question is on the same chart, albeit slightly more mischievous. So it is interesting to note sort of the differences across the wards on the sort of the funding. And given that we're asked to note the distribution, you know, particularly with a nod to then how funds are allocated going forward, do we have stakeholders, dare I say, who kind of know the rules of the game and perhaps are slightly more efficient in terms of the applications that are put in? Is there anything better that we could or should be doing from a communications perspective? I know, you know, speaking personally, whenever I go to parish council meetings, I always raise sort of funds and grants that are available or of relevance locally. But just like Councillor White said, you know, the ward I represent, I was surprised, I must admit, to see is the lowest of those present, albeit is present on the graph. So yeah, it's just a question as to whether there's anything we need to do differently in that regard going forward.
I think I'll ask Ms. Robbins to answer that one.
Yeah, thank you. Very happy to answer that one. Actually, under this scheme, it was competitive, and we actually had a lot of new projects, and new applicants come forward. So it wasn't the same organisations. We have done surgeries, we had online help that people could access. So we did a lot to ensure that groups, if they were interested, could talk to our programme manager and be helped through the process. So we did a lot to ensure that those that perhaps weren't experienced or perhaps were new to this were absolutely helped through it. So the support was very much there. I think with that we didn't allocate the money, so it wasn't like there was a set amount for each ward and then who came forward. It was competitive, and some of this might be that there are it might be the number of projects might have been useful to understand as well, because there might be a couple of big ones and that affects the profile, opposed to, you know, lots of little ones for the same value. So, you know, there could be a difference there because of the scale of the projects involved as well. But we felt that actually the response from new organisations was very strong.
Sorry, Councillor Murphy.
Yes, thanks for the presentation. Just a question around the matching. I mean, one to say, obviously, it's very encouraging that we were able to sort of multiply up the effect of the money as effectively as we have. So the first question is to understand how much you decide to give, how much you're effectively demanding organisations to put up in order to support them. And then a sort of corollary question then is, were there any good projects that actually would have met the criteria but actually couldn't find enough funds themselves to match? Is that something going forward that's a concern?
Well, firstly, the match funding really came from businesses, and we did start off in year one, I believe, that businesses had to match fund by 50%. We then, because we felt we weren't getting enough traction with businesses, we allowed them to have a bit more flexibility, and I think I'll hand over to to the officers who will be. But we allowed them more flexibility, let's say, in terms of. But before I hand over, even if it was a parish council bid, they would come to us saying, this is the total amount of our, you know, the work we want to do, and we would like you to fund X amount. So it wasn't match funding in quite the same way. They'd already, you know, got halfway to starting that project, and they just needed the extra money to take them over the line.
I'll say a few points and then I'll hand over as well. I think we did reflect on whether that was going to be a barrier, the amount of match funding, and we actually discussed it at the partnership board, and their insight was very valuable in how we designed that. We looked at whether it should be based on size or size of the grant, size of the business or sectors. So we actually debated, and the input that we got from the partnership board was very useful in us then adjusting how we took forward the requirement for match funding. And as Councillor Thompson says, a lot of these projects were part of a bigger scheme, a bit bigger ambition. So that was almost the match funding in and of itself rather than a requirement of the grant. So it was all wrapped up in that. But I think you might have some more information on this type of match funding. Thank you.
Yes, just to add that in the first round of REPF funding, we only managed to finance 5 businesses in the end, because the requirement to put up 50% was such a challenge for so many of the small and medium-sized businesses in the area. So we rethought it, and anybody that could be described as a small business to a medium-sized business was asked to put up 25%, and anything that could be considered a micro business, of which we have rather a lot, was not required to put in any match funding whatsoever. So that made the difference between having 5 satisfactory applications that passed the due diligence and 32. And that's where we made the difference with surrounding districts, I think, that said that they struggled to get businesses to take up the REPF, because this business of the match funding is very daunting for a very small business, I think.
Councillor Horrell.
Chair, good evening and thank you for the information here. I, like fellow councillors, are sort of noting the disproportionate spread across all of our wards in the rural communities. So I have two requests really. One is, could you please in the next round clarify the rules, and that articulation of different sizes of business may help people to better understand whether this is something they could potentially access. So a clarification of the rules to come out to us so that we as ward and links to parish councils can advocate for this and perhaps encourage in areas where there hasn't been the same level of interest, and also to better understand your 2.47 on page 23 about these sort of engagement activities that you're proposing, so that we can better understand how that message can be more widely available. You say that there's going to be sort of business engagement activities, just to help us understand what they are going to be. Thank you.
Councillor.
Well, first
Oh,
of all,
sorry.
yeah. I thought I'd got it on. Apologies. Very happy to set those out. You know, this has been going for 3 years, and periodically I've been talking about it. I think that for the next year, obviously, we're delighted, but it was quite unexpected that we would get another tranche of funding, but that's absolutely great. And yes, we've yet really to consider how we're going to, because it's quite a tight time frame, because we weren't expecting it. We thought the programme would come to an end in a matter of weeks, but obviously it's now carrying on, and we only have that window of opportunity to get the money out. So we've got to consider how we might go about informing everybody of this next tranche of money, and then allowing enough time for organisations to get their bids in.
Councillor White.
From what you've just said, you might not know the answer to this because obviously it's quite unexpected, but I wanted to ask about lessons learned. So you've been doing it for 3 years. I wondered if there might be things in the next phase that you might do differently. And also I noticed certain areas, like for example, green spaces projects were below the expected target. I wonder if there's a way that you might focus on that more. Is that possible to focus on areas that had low funding or lower than expected?
I'm going to pass over to Ms. Robbins for that one.
Yeah, thank you. I mean, as we touched on a moment ago, we did a lot of the lessons learned as we went along. We had the opportunity to refine as we did the open calls, and so adjustments were made as we went along. When we set the investment plans, it's what we felt would be coming forward, but this is absolutely about local driven need, and so trying to promote it and provide that opportunity, and then for those projects to come forward by those organisations. We can look at addressing under represented sort of areas or topics, but we would need to perhaps work with our partnership board, who have a better local knowledge of that activity, to understand, have we shaped it right? Is there a demand? Are they going somewhere else? So I think the partnership board, their expertise in those particular areas can be really helpful in helping us design those improvements, and they were as we went through the year. So yes, it's very much about ensuring that what local communities and local organisations want to have delivered in their areas, we provide the opportunity for that to come forward. And I think some of that is yet to be designed and really fully reviewed. But as I say, as we went along, we realised that we weren't perhaps reaching some groups. So we had a really concerted effort on that business engagement. We went out, we went to all of the local meetings, we held surgeries in local areas. So we tried to be adaptive and flexible as we went. So that will be, you know, hardwired in hopefully into the programme as we go for the final year.
Councillor Morris.
Yes, wearing my auditing hats, looking at the allocation, it's about 1,745,000, and the amount of money spent is slightly under that. It's 1,691,000. So there's about a 54,000 gap. And my question is just about that money, really, whether we have to send that back to the government or whether that rolls over into the next allocation and we can add that and spend that in the next allocation.
Thank you. So what we haven't included in that total expenditure is the 4% we were allowed to, which is about 40,000 or so, that we were allowed to allocate to the project management. So so we haven't included it in grant giving, but it absolutely has supported the council in being able to manage and run the programmes and sort of administer it. So, and then there is a very, very small, there's a few thousand that we're just getting out the door now. So we are expecting to come in very, very close, but we haven't included the administration costs in that total. That's only for the grants given out.
So the policy is to try and spend every single penny of the money.
Thank you. I've got a question on bullet point 2.17. It says that 42% of the UK SPF and the RAPF grant was allocated to business related activities. Was that a figure that we set at the outset, or is that just as a result of what came in as proposals or projects suggested?
I believe the figure that was set in the investment plan was much lower. After the first round of the RAPF, the board did request that we made a special effort to contact business, and the result of that was that we had an avalanche of applications from businesses, and we had some very, very good applications, some of which we were unable to fund, but most of them got funding. And that's why that percentage is rather higher than we originally anticipated.
So to some extent, my question comes back to that as Councillor White, in that we set our expectations and when we weren't able to meet them, we relaxed it and allowed a higher percentage for business than we were actually expecting in the first place. So is that not an issue in terms of the fact that we are underfunding community effort as to the sort of detriment of business? So are we, you know, sort of convinced that it was the right decision to actually make that or allow that change to happen?
When we first set the investment plan, we did a profile of how we thought the monies could be distributed through the applications that come forward. It was only ever indicative. It was just to show that there was the opportunities, what priority we wanted to give, etc. So when the rounds of competitive applications came through, they were all judged against each other and they applied to different strands. And so we were always being able to just adjust here. If one, rather than thinking it was undersubscribed, if one was more, you know, oversubscribed, we could move, but we were only ever allowed to move a certain percentage. Government said you can't, you know, just suddenly change direction completely. So we had thresholds ourselves that we had to work within, and it very much about making sure that those projects that came forward, there was only a handful that we ever didn't fund, and it wasn't because we were paying more in this side or more in that side. It was for due diligence. They didn't meet the criteria. They couldn't deliver in time. So we were always keeping a balanced view on what we were able to fund. So it was a prediction, and the prediction came out slightly different in reality when the competitive applications came through.
So what was the original percentage that you'd anticipated for business?
We'd have to look back at the investment plan to give you an accurate answer on that. I couldn't say. I don't have that figure with me now.
Councillor Thompson.
Yes, sorry, Chair, I don't have that figure either, but I just wanted to remind the committee that the 3 strands of investment priorities were communities and place, supporting local business, and skills and people. And you could kind of argue that supporting local business and skills and people are sort of helping business in the long run too, because obviously you're trying to upskill the potential workforce and allow them to help them increase their employability. I just thought it was worth bringing that to the attention. And also under communities in place, it was improvements to local high streets. So, you know, there was a lot in the government's sort of strands that pushed us towards business.
Yes, sir.
Thank you. That leads me to think also that some of these percentages might be not double counting, but so a business activity might also be a green activity, might also be a skills one. So I think it's that point that it's not as absolutely clear cut. Many of these projects covered multiple aspects, gave multiple outcomes, and then so therefore they probably fall into 2 or 3 of the categories. So it's not absolutely very, you know, regimented as a business. They could be doing something that is skills related or green. So yeah.
Councillor Ashwell. Sorry, Councillor Thompson.
Sorry, just before Ms Robbins and Ms Sharp comment on the other bits and pieces. In terms of feedback, actually in the report there are a couple of case studies which and quotes from businesses and communities saying how much they've valued the grant and what it has given them. And in fact, in the paper, there is a link, I believe, to our website, which actually gives a whole load of other case studies and feedback from those organisations that you can have a look at. But I'll hand over.
Thank you. I'll take your first point about the guidance as to whether or not there was a specific amount we had to allocate across those themes. No, it was not. It was absolutely locally driven. It was clear that as an area, we had to determine what was important for us and then decide how that was going to be shared amongst those areas. And we did that work back in 2022, and we took the investment plan to Cabinet, and that was where those were supported. So there was a lot of work previous to that. We did a call out to partners to say what was important. So there was a lot of work to develop up locally what we determined to be those indicative shares across those themes.
So if I'm correct, there's only one element of your question left to answer, which is the 5 or 6 projects that were initially put into the investment plan that in the end didn't materialise. One of those was a duplicate of another project. So, for example, two different organisations had proposed doing the same. It was a digital skills project, and we've run a couple of digital skills projects through the UK SPF, both of which have been incredibly successful, but we didn't need a third one. So that was why one went, and I can pass you details of the other four offhand. I can't quite remember, but one of them was a history festival, which in the end, nobody had the time to organise. It was that sort of thing. It wasn't that there was anything wrong with the application. It was sheer volume of work. And most of these were being promoted by colleagues who already might have had another project that was being financed by the UK SPF.
Councillor White.
So I think it mentions in the report a sort of impact assessments in terms of economics, but with my EDI hat on, were you required to do kind of equality impact assessments, or did the applicants have to prove that they were reaching to a diverse range of people?
Yes, absolutely. In our application form, there's a whole section on everything from safeguarding to diversity, and they have to send us their policies if they have them, and if they don't, and they should, they have to write a policy before they can make the application. They have to report back on their end of project report how their project has affected all these different communities, and a lot of them put quite a lot of effort into saying exactly how the improvements they were going to, for example, Wickham Vineyard, one element of that project is to make the track accessible for wheelchairs so that people can actually move around the vineyard and have a nice sort of rural experience before they go to a wedding in the vineyard, that sort of thing. So a lot of our applicants have put a lot of thought into that element. And of course, it gives them a higher score, and it's a competitive fund. So we have ended up financing those with the highest scores. That's how the selection was made.
Sorry, Councillor Morris, sorry.
Oh, yeah, my question's about the unsuccessful applicants, because as I say, they could be rejected for either because they failed to meet the criteria, or because in the competitive process you've described there were better projects on offer. And as there's a new funding round going through, those projects were turned down. We'll be considering whether to put in another application. And my question is basically, have they been informed on how they failed, so that they know either to resubmit thinking of better criteria, or their initial submission was okay, it just didn't get through the competition?
Yes, absolutely. We give them instant feedback. Actually, we give them feedback throughout the application process. The telephone line is always open, and we encourage them to speak to us before they put in the application, because the form is about 7 pages long and quite onerous. And there are ways in which you can describe a project which don't sell it as well for the purposes of our scoring criteria, as if somebody triggers you to think of the elements of your project you haven't thought to comment. They often say, but of course this is open to X, Y, and Z. And you say, well, put it in, you know, don't omit important details like that, because it's important that we can visualize exactly how this is going to benefit the community. So those that have been unsuccessful, there are very few that were categorically disastrous from the get-go. A lot of them were unsuccessful because they hadn't acquired or achieved their planning permission. So with those, some of them were able to go away after one round and come back one round later, having managed to gain their planning consent. Some insisted they didn't need planning consent and then found that they did. Some of them needed landlord consent. It was usually that sort of thing that set them back, because we couldn't promise public funds to something that nobody had any control over the timing of. If your project's not ready to start from the moment the award is made, then there's a danger you won't be able to complete that project before the government deadlines. And of course, we don't get any reimbursement for projects that aren't completed on time. So the planning consents, the landlord consents, those sorts of things were setbacks for some projects, but some did return because of the feedback.
So the ones which were unsuccessful and advised, it's worth putting in another bid.
Absolutely. If it were merely a question of timing on something like a planning consent, yes. But if there was something fundamentally wrong with the project, which I don't think we had a single case of that, then we would also be honest, I'm sure.
If I may, there were some occasions when certain pieces of equipment or certain activities we were actually instructed had to be funded from different funds. So they had to be directed to those, and we made sure that they were advised of that. They were given all the information to enable them to apply under these different funds. So if we tried our very best not to get to the point where someone almost put in a failed application. So, but there were times when we had to redirect as well to other funding sources.
Councillor Horrell.
Chair, thank you. How do we define the award area, given that this is the Rural Prosperity Fund? Because, for example, you've got Whiteley and Shedfield, so you've got sort of city and rural. Are you drawing a line on a map in when someone comes in and you say, actually, you're in the wrong postcode, essentially, to qualify? Because you've got a couple of wards here that are as much urban as they are rural. So how is that defined? Where does the line on the map go, please?
There's a magic map produced by DEFRA, and they have to give us their postcode, and sometimes they are right on the border. But in the case of Whiteley and Shedfield, that sum, I think, is there may be 2 projects in Shedfield, but there's nothing from Whiteley.
Thank you.
Councillor Atchwell.
This time with the mic. Thank you, Chair. This is inconsistency in terms of the numbers that you have presented, and probably you'll sort of easily clarify that. It's on page 20 where you state out the number, the total grant award to the rural area, and it's about 1.2 million. That's what the table says. But when you add up the actual numbers that are allocated to the various wards, it doesn't add up to that. It's added up to about 0.9 million. So I just wondered, it must be a little discrepancy somewhere. Nothing big deal. Just wanted to make sure.
I'm not sure we could have spent 1.2 million on the rural fund.
Well, that's what the table 2.31 says, 1.23 million total grant award to rural areas.
And beyond 900.
No, I think the table on 2.31 actually is some of them received a bit of money from the UK Shared Prosperity Fund too, which put it over the amount allocated in the rural fund.
Yes.
All right.
About £200,000 worth of UK SPF was used to finance some of the REPF applicants.
Yeah. Thank you.
Okay, Councillor Thompson, I just wondered if it's possible, the second point on the request of the committee is to note the government priorities and provide a comment on the council's approach for distributing the funds that you mentioned there that are going to be allocated next year. Is it possible just to give a short summary, either yourself or one of the officers, on what the government priorities are, if they've changed from last year, and sort of the areas that you're looking for, particularly in terms of guidance from this committee?
I'm not aware of a change in the investment plan and the priorities, but I'm sure the officers might tell me otherwise if that's the case.
there is a slight change, and unfortunately it affects green spaces. The new, it's on the government website. They have issued a new scheme of themes and sub-themes, and broadly they're the same as they were 3 years ago, but they have pretty much eradicated anything to do with green spaces. The only area where you could insert that, and we have complete liberty to do that, would be under health and well-being. You would argue that countryside is good for people, but they have not specifically introduced a theme to do with green spaces this time. This government is clearly looking at the businesses and, to a lesser extent, skills, and the health and well-being aspects of community. That's more where their stress lies, but broadly they've made it so that you can pretty much present anything that's very dear to you, but it has to fit into one of these themes of theirs.
If I may, the link in the report takes you to that diagram that you were, my colleague here was just explaining. And I think the thing is that it aligns now to their sort of their missions for growth. So I think that's where there's been a slight shift. But there's still communities in place supporting local business and people and skills. It's just some of the granularity that we had in the other one has gone, and they've actually made it a little bit narrower in some of those activities. But we are thinking that it's worked very well. We have been learning the lessons as we've gone along. We have a year, and we want to reflect some, perhaps shift and some sort of thought about where we might go. But overall, we feel that this has been working. We'd want to continue along a similar vein, although, we will take in any sort of slight shift. But overall, with the time available to us and the fact that we have everything in place to move, and we have a partnership board, etc., we feel it's going to be evolution rather than revolution for the last year.
Thank you for that. So based on the sort of conversation, the questions that the committee have asked, and the clarification there from Ms. Robbins and Ms. Sharp, I just ask now for the committee to consider the second item that we're asked to think about in terms of comment on the council's approach for distributing the funds and for the UK SPF extension. Are there every areas that sort of from the discussion or from the sort of answers that we've had that the committee feels that we should be focusing on or asking there to be more of an emphasis on in terms of the allocation that's coming through for next year's funding? Councillor Hurrell.
Chair, thank you. In 2.45, it talks about the delegated authority to the corporate head and portfolio holder, and it will be sought at an up and coming cabinet meeting. When might we expect that, please?
I think it might be tomorrow. So the cabinet reports that set out the investment plan gave me the delegated authority to manage the programme, but obviously it ran out will run out at the end of March this year. So we have asked within the budget papers that that be extended for a year.
Councillor Dawson, yeah.
I was just going to say, yes, you're absolutely right, because it is all part of the budget process, and my name is linked to some of the grants, the grant section of that budget paper.
Councillor White.
So in terms of our comments on future priorities, it's a shame to hear that green spaces isn't included directly in what's there. But like you say, I think it's really important in the health and well-being side of things. And given that we're in a nature emergency and how important those green spaces are for communities. So I think that is something to definitely focus on, and given that it was below target on the previous round. And I think now from your answers to our questions, I think I've got a better understanding of what's actually needed for the process. And so I think us as ward councillors can do more for those areas, those wards that aren't included and that are low funded.
Councillor Thompson.
I'm just going to add there, yes, I think the partnership board and certainly officers and myself would really welcome the assistance of ward councillors to make sure that if there are projects in your wards that they are presented, and the board can then give them sort of due diligence and see whether they can be included in a grant.
Thank you. Just going back to the question I had about the percentage of allocations to business, has, in terms of the forecast for the next year, that reverted to the original expectation, or are you still then going to use the sort of the current percentages that have been allocated as the baseline?
We haven't got that far yet. We're still in design phase, so that is part of this, seeking views, reviewing, looking at what we might want to prioritise, taking in lots of different sort of views on that. So we haven't actually stipulated that yet.
So on that, does the committee have any views or sort of how the allocation of that fund should be prioritised? Councillor Orrell.
Chair, I hope officers and the portfolio holder have heard tonight there is some perhaps slight concern that we've edged more to business, and maybe we should be thinking to sort of rebalance some of that. So there's a geography question we've asked. There's a clarity of how to access things, the ready reckoner for us to help people get at least to first stage, and also that spread. I noted the comment regarding skills, which is a shame because training and skills is obviously a fundamental for most businesses, and perhaps even though that isn't in the key priorities in the same way, maybe that's one area that we could also think about. So I think just being cognizant of that and that spread, and also because as a district we have a very sort of diverse set of businesses and activities that might benefit from this. So we need to make sure that we don't leave any stones unturned. And if you can help us as ward councillors with some of that information, I think that would be helpful to prompt some applications, and maybe a kind ear for people to ask you lots of questions about whether they might qualify. Thank you.
Councillor Chamberlain.
Thank you, Chair. I'm inclined to agree, but I guess I'm also reassured. We've heard from the answers tonight that we incorporate lessons learned into the process, that there's clear and transparent feedback to applicants. So I think to your point, from my perspective, the only thing I'd note is that you'd hope there'd be a continuation of that as we look forward and we move forward with the scheme. If we build that into our day-to-day process, then that will evolve the thinking in terms of how we take this forward.
Councillor Twell.
One of my concern is that we got a very short period. 1st of April is when you're going to allocate the grant, and we really haven't yet focused on what the division is going to be. But I'm sure people do take time to apply for it, and then there's a second round of it. It takes a while. So I don't know how you overcome that, but that's my concern. The issue that Chair raised about where would you like to see this investment go into, and I fully support the community project because they really help the community. I've seen that happening the fund didn't come through UK SPF or RPF, but the community activity that go on, and not just in Whiteley but neighbouring, would really benefit people. And Councillor Wallace was talking about, Councillor White was talking about the EDI, and particularly old people. I think that's where this fund really come in handy. So community projects will be my priority, to be honest with you. Thank you.
Thank you. I think if we move on now to any debate, so if there's any debate that councillors would like to have on this particular paper, before we then move into conclusion. Councillor Ashwell?
I must congratulate officers and the cabinet members. 70% of this fund is spent on rural area. That is really an achievement and fantastic achievement for that matter. And you're seeing the returns over the last 3-4 years, not only in your report, but I heard from people who have benefited from that. So I think it's fantastic what you've done, and I'm hoping that we can do even better in the coming year. I know it's 1 year, it's a short period, but it will continue to be like that. I fully support what you've been doing. And as earlier mentioned, that if we can learn the lessons and get more people apply for it, that will be even better. But the 1 year, one month period is a very short period, unfortunately. Yeah, thank you.
Councillor Chamberlain.
Thank you, Chair. I mean, I think we should note, as the report states, that, and I think it was alluded to earlier on, that other authorities have kind of struggled to fully allocate the funds available under the scheme, whereas we clearly are at, nearly 100% spend allocation by the sounds of it. So to build on what Councillor Atchwell said, sort of congratulations on that front, because I'm sure it's no small effort, and you've set yourself a very high benchmark for next time around.
Thank you. And yes, I'd like to just add my thanks and congratulations for the effort that's been involved. I am aware, as a chairing a committee for the Town Forum in terms of grant allocations, how difficult it is in actually getting an encouraging, and Ms. Roberts is fully aware of the discussions I've had with members of her team, of getting organisations to actually come forward to actually take advantage of funding and grants that are available. So my compliments to the team in terms of, as Councillor Chamberlain has said, succeeding where many others seem to have failed in terms of fully allocating and fully using that funding. Clearly, it is a fund that disappears if not used. So better to use it in ways that we can within the district, even if that's meant that, obviously, as been said, we have changed some of the parameters, some of the percentages that we had as targets. But fully appreciate the work that's been involved to achieve that. So thank you all very much. Thank you. And then just moving on in terms of conclusions, I think just pulling together from the questions, I think, yes, there's some concerns about the allocation across the wards and the equitable distribution of the funding across the rural and district areas. And if there's some way that can be addressed in terms of communicating, and I'm sure now that the councillors who are represented here at the committee are aware of that they'll take that back to their ward members and their ward teams and work with the parishes and the other organisations in their wards to encourage them to now come forward to apply for the grants that are now coming forward for the next fiscal year. The other thing I think was the question of the levels of match funding. Clearly, again, that had to be reduced to encourage businesses to actually engage. But is that something that we should be trying to maintain and actually at least getting an element of contribution from businesses as they are benefiting then from the funding that we are able to allocate to them? Then there was the question about the levels of funding towards businesses, and a feeling, I think, from the committee that we should be trying to go and encourage more community and involvement in community applications for that funding, and the continued then lessons to be learnt, both in terms of successful projects and how they've proceeded, but also in terms of feeding back to those that weren't successful, and continuing to maintain, sort of that dialogue to ensure that we have a stream of potential projects which then can sort of proceed into the next year. But I think that seems to that was the conclusion of where we were for the conversations. But thank you again for coming along and presenting, and a successful use of funding from the government. I look forward to another successful year in the coming year. So thank you both. Thank you all very much. Thank you. Okay, so if we move on to the next item 7, which is the housing repairs and maintenance policies. Here we have recommendations to review and comment upon 4 proposed policies. The first, the disabled adaptations policy. The second, the housing repairs and maintenance policy. The third, housing repairs recharge policy, and the fourth, managing damp and mould. I'll ask Councillor Westwood to introduce, and then we will take each of those 4 in turn in terms of questions. Thank you.
Thank you, Chair. Thank you for the opportunity to bring this paper to your committee today. We consulted with tenants through a survey in May 2024 on the housing repairs service to gather input on how the repairs service should operate in the future and to support the work of retendering for the repairs and maintenance contract. In addition, we held workshops with tenants and with members following the online consultation. The policies brought to the meeting have been updated, including with feedback we received through this consultation process, and the policies will inform the Council's approach for delivery of housing repairs and maintenance going forwards. The areas covered by these policies have not been applied consistently in the past, but it's our intention to apply these policies consistently going forwards. We're looking for your comments on the 4 policies, and following this committee, the draft policies, along with your comments, will be taken into a further tenant consultation programme before going to Cabinet Committee Housing in July 2025 to seek approval. These policies, when agreed, will form part of the modernisation of the housing services by clearly defining the scope of housing services covered by these policies, and will be applied in a consistent and easily understood way in the operation of the business. The papers are relatively short and self-explanatory, so we don't intend doing a presentation today, but we're keen to hear your views on each policy area. And Gillian and I'll be happy to answer any questions you may have and provide any clarification required. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Westwood. So, as I said at the introduction there, I'd like to take each of the policies in turn. So, if there are questions on the disabled adaptations policy, we'll start with that one. Councillor Morris.
Oh yes, it's regarding the definition of living with disabilities. It has they are physically disabled by illness or impairment present since birth or otherwise. And that doesn't seem to explicitly include disability due to injury or accident, because that I would not regard that as the result of illness. I'd regard that as a result of being knocked over by a car or so on. And so can you clarify that that is actually regarded as a type of disability on this definition?
Yes, it would be. That's been missed. Certainly, yeah, we've certainly assisted people that have been in car accidents or other similar incidences. Yes, if it meant they could no longer live in their current home independently, then we would look to help where we can, either through an adaptation or through the housing register.
So could I ask for change where it's physically disabled by illness or life-changing events or something like that?
Thank you, Councillor Morris. Councillor Horrell.
Chair, I have a question on this policy, but it applies to all 4, and that is the whole process of appeal. Because I read we're almost marking our own homework through a sort of officer hierarchy, and some of these decisions may be quite significant for some of the tenants. And I wonder whether we have paid enough attention in all of these policies to how we go through that process of review. If someone is dissatisfied with the decision at whatever level, whether there is a better way than I've read here in how that is escalated and reviewed, because sometimes people really want to feel they've had a fair hearing, and it may be that we need to amend that if we're going to do what we say we do, which is the other question, because we have powers at the moment to enforce some of the actions in these policies, but we don't always do it. And so my question is, on top of that, if we are going to adopt these policies, are we actually going to enforce them in a universal way, which I don't see, even though some of the abilities are already there, I don't see that happening across our whole housing portfolio. Thank you, Chair.
Councillor Westwood, do you want to?
I'll defer to the officer.
I think that's the purpose of the policies. You're quite right. We do have lots of current processes and lots of opportunities to carry out enforcement work. It obviously would be our very last resort. But the issue has been we haven't got those policies to underline that. We have got an appeals policy clearly set out in the recharge policy. There will be appeal around that, and obviously we'll need to collect extremely robust information with regards to recharging tenants in the opportunities that the policy sets out. You are right, within the disabled facilities grant policy, I don't think it does mention an appeals process. That's something I'll take back to officers. People do go through quite a robust assessment. We do it jointly with Hampshire County Council, as you know. So generally, adaptations are very well received, but you're right, there could be occasions when we have had disputes, they've gone through the normal complaints process, but perhaps through the panel, that's the disabled facilities panel, then perhaps that's something where we could look at there as an appeal if that decision goes against them. But generally, I think we are fairly accommodating with our adaptations.
Chair, if I could just say, I think the clarity there for everyone, both the council and the tenants, and perhaps a consistency on appeals would be helpful. So, that might be something you want to refine, given that this is an opportunity at policy development to think about whether we're being we're doing that as best we can. Thank you.
Thank you. Councillor White.
So it's just regarding budgets really, and the need, the sort of estimated need for these adaptations, and in light of sort of an ageing population going forward, there might be more need for this. And I see that you've set these benchmark amounts for the minor adaptations and the major ones. Are they different? Are they revised benchmarks from the previous policy? And is that taken into account the other budget constraints?
Yes, we have seen an increase in adaptation requests. Some of them are quite large extensions, and they're something that is really difficult to accommodate that. Our preference would be to help in other ways, and that may be to find more suitable accommodation. We have increased the budget for 25-26. We have a budget of just over 900k, but we also obviously have the repairs and maintenance budget, which picks up some of the work, which is over 10 million.
Councillor Murphy.
Thank you, Chair. Just a question around timescales. And I mean, within the aims, you've got this ensures no resident waits longer than 12 months for an approved adaptation to be progressed. So it's a question of, I mean, obviously 12 months is a very long time for somebody, particularly in this sort of situation, as to how much, sort of how that 12 months was chosen, how much in terms of timescales it actually normally takes for these sort of things. Is this a backstop, or actually is this something that is potentially likely to be hit, and therefore actually whether you set that at 12 months or 9 months is a material factor in terms of how you're running things?
Yes, it is it's not a a set timeline, but it is something that we would hope to aim that within a year we would be able to facilitate. It very much depends on the adaptation. You know, if we're looking at very minor adaptations such as grab rails and handrails to get in and out of properties, obviously we could do those a lot quicker. If they are quite large adaptations, then we will need to go out to contractors, we will need to tender, and we will need to do much more substantial work. Then that might take a longer period. It very much depends on the individual's needs.
Is it useful from this committee? Is it useful to have a steer as to whether you would want something that was almost a more challenging one to help you push things along, or actually do you feel that 12 months is an appropriate one to have as the aim?
Take that away and discuss with the OTs and officers, certainly.
Thank you.
Councillor Morris.
Yes, a question regarding item 5.4 on page 35 about if I understand it correctly, the repercussions of the policy is that we will have a property which has been adapted for those with disabilities, but if no people with disabilities are available at that particular moment, that property will be let out to an able-bodied person. Could we then find ourselves in a situation where there is successively demand for that, from a need for that property for a disabled person, but we can't evict that able-bodied person from that property? That's correct, isn't it? That we can't ask them nicely to leave, that someone else's need is greater.
Councillor.
Thank you, Chair. There are quite a lot of comments in the policy about under occupation. And, you have someone perhaps in a bungalow, they might be under occupying, but they do need some adaptations because of the stage of life that they're in. So it feels as if there is a way in here, it feels as if we're trying to get people to move and move to an appropriately sized property as sort of as the carrot for getting your adaptations, because as I say, it flows through this policy in several places about under occupation. And I might feel, if I was the tenant, slightly victimised by that, I've ended up, because person X in my family's moved, I'm left there and I am under occupying, but it's not through any deliberate fault, and now I need some help. And this policy would say on certain things that we're not going to help. I just wanted to clarify that we really do mean that for everyone who comes forward, that they would be considered if they were not under occupying, but if they are, then they won't be on the list, as it were. Thank you.
That's an interesting point to make, because I haven't picked that up from the policy, and it isn't something that we're aiming to do. We obviously want to make best use of our stock, and there will be circumstances where it's not sensible to adapt the property if there's lots of steps going up to the front door or they can't get upstairs. But no, we wouldn't say to somebody who's under occupying but needs an adaptation that we wouldn't do it, but we would encourage them to downsize where we could and find them a more of a lifetime kind of long-term property that's more suitable. But it would be challenging to completely refuse.
So, Chair, if I could just say, I think we just need to be very clear then about what the words we're using in here, because I think the rationale that Mrs. Knight's just given is perfectly reasonable about the right sizing of properties, but we have words in here that we probably need to just be really clear about. If there's more flexibility in the system, then perhaps just reading the various clauses. Thank you.
Yes, though coming back to Councillor Morris's point in terms of, sort of properties that are then being occupied by, sort of potentially able-bodied people, the more likelihood of a large property, sort of being needed by a family, and therefore, sort of the adaptations may then sort of be sort of something that would sort of be lost, because they then are, is then being used by a family subsequently. So I suppose it is making sure that we're actually applying our application, our funding to properties which are more likely in the long term to continue to be occupied by people needing that type of adaptation. So it is a balance, I'm sure. Okay. There was just one question I had was I think there's comment about the fact that adaptations wouldn't be supported in the event of a property being subject to a right to buy. Is there any opportunity to put in some sort of clawback on this policy, which means that within a certain period of time after an adaptation has been implemented and the right to buy is then applied for, that we could actually then incorporate that as part of the negotiation over the right to buy?
No, we wouldn't be able to do that legally.
Is there a reason why we can't do that?
Under the right to buy legislation, the property is valued and the discount's calculated against the market value of the property, and often adaptations actually deflate the market value of the property rather than increase it. So there wouldn't be the ability for us to get that back. It's different in relation to disabled facilities grants to the private sector, but not in relation to the council's housing stock.
Thank you. Councillor Horrell.
Chair, one of the elements is about training of council staff over and above, obviously, the expert sort of OT resource that we have, which has made a big difference in this area, and whether we have that in place to support a broader group of officers to have that knowledge and understanding to help in this applying this policy. Thank you.
That's an ambition of the policy, yes.
Are there any further questions on the first paper, the disabled adaptations policy? Councillor Horrell.
Chair, again, this is a broader point. Councillor Westwood mentioned that there was the survey, which obviously was very well responded to, 823, but it was really about the repair service. And when we came to do the sort of building of the policies and the workshops, there were only 17 residents in attendance. Are we happy that the consultation that relates to this particular policy, which is slightly, it's not necessarily just about repairs, this is about changing lives with the disabled adaptations, that we have reached out to our tenants as well as we might? Thank you.
I'll take that one, Chair, if I may.
Thanks.
Okay, the answer is no, Councillor, because I said that I wanted these to go back round through the consultation with the tenants, and I actually, I've insisted they come back through this committee and then go back through the relevant tenants groups, and we'll decide what that is. And how they work, so we'll take them through the consumer groups, the right places to get that input. So I want more input from tenants, not just on this policy, but on all of them.
Thank you.
Thank you. So if we now move on to the second policy, the housing repairs and maintenance policy. Councillor White.
So going back to the tenant satisfaction, of the areas that had dropped quite significantly was the sort of communication about the repairs to the tenants. I just wondered what is there in this policy that's going to address that communication side of things?
Can I first go at that? Thank you. We're not referring to the tenant satisfaction survey here. We're referring to the survey that was done when we went through to look at the repairs and maintenance contract. So the two are very different, and it's clear that we need to go back around the loop on this with the consultation.
Councillor Morris.
Yes, it's regarding if someone calls out for an emergency repair and it's then deemed not to have been an emergency, that they may be recharged. So I'm just looking at the sort of what counts as emergency and what counts as urgent repair. Urgent repair is anything, I mean, emergency, sorry, is anything which is an immediate danger to life. Whereas unsafe electrical fittings is just regarded as urgent. Now, I'd say that if something is unsafe, wouldn't that put it in the category of being a danger to life?
Define unsafe, Councillor Morris. I mean, this could be a light switch that's moving around a bit, but no wires exposed. I mean, you know, this is why we need people on our service desks or receiving the service requests coming in that can make that decision, right? Because it's you know, you've got to make a decision whether this is an emergency. You're talking about emergency, not urgent here, and whether we got to deal with it within 2 hours. There's exposed wires, yeah, but the reason we need to define this clearly is that within the service at the moment, we're getting too many that are categorised as emergency or urgent. And this is why we need a clear policy of what defines that. The staff, you talked about staff training, the staff need to be trained to triage these as they come in and allocate them appropriately. So that's at the point that will be decided.
So anything for an urgent repair, by definition, is not a threat to life or injury.
It defines emergency in here and urgent. So which one are you talking about?
We just say that anything which, for instance, for the electrical fittings, you'd say something like unsafe electrical fittings which don't cause a threat of injury would be counted as an urgent repair. And ones which do cause a threat to injury would be an emergency.
If it's unsafe and it's going to cause damage to the property, to the person, then it's an emergency, you know, and that's the way it needs to be done. So we need to triage these reports as they come in and categorise them correctly. And that's, you know, partly is the policy, partly is the interpretation of the policy, and partly is the training.
Thank you.
Councillor White.
So it's just a point of clarification, really. On page 50, it sort of sets out, it says minor repairs should be carried out by the tenant. Is there a very clear list then in their tenancy agreement that really says what those minor repairs are? So there's no sort of grey area as to whether it's the tenant's responsibility or the council to repair.
Roles and responsibilities are set out in the tenant's handbook and also in the tenancy conditions. So again, it would be a call when they, you know, be called for one of the hub officers to decide whether that's a minor one that they could carry out themselves or whether that's something that we would need to. And this is really the reasoning for the policy, is this so that we can be very clear about that in the future.
Councillor Murphy, was it? Did you want to? Sorry, Councillor Atwell, sorry.
Thank you, Chair. One of the responsibility tenant has is to maintain humidity levels in the home, but then we have issue of damp and mold. So how does that work with this maintaining the humidity levels in the home?
We have a separate damp and mold policy that will cover that off.
Indeed, that's exactly right. You have that policy, but then here saying that maintain humidity levels, how can that be tenant's responsibility? Isn't it responsibility to have the mold and damp in control?
Chair, I suppose the example would be if a tenant in their property is running a bath with all the doors and windows closed, having pans on their stove with no lids on there, creating a lot of moisture in their property and not opening windows and releasing that moisture, and therefore the moisture that's in their home is condensing on cold surfaces and therefore providing the grounds for mold growth and that, then that wouldn't be appropriate. It wouldn't be in their interest and wouldn't be in our interest as a landlord to allow that to happen. So we would be asking them and providing them advice to do everything they could to make sure they don't generate excess moisture in their home, which can create those problems.
Councillor Horrell.
Thank you, Chair. One of the important aspects of this policy is the out of hours service, which has not always been our best in class, I think it's fair to say. And there are a lot of things that hang off of that in terms of the out of hours sort of notification, and then the follow up in terms of the urgent repairs that come from that. Can we be assured that our out of hours process is sufficiently robust for this policy then to flow through and be a realistic expectation, please?
Thank you. Yes, we'll be looking at that as part of our re-procurement of our current contracts. But actually, we have seen quite an improvement in that of recent. But we will that's certainly part of our repairs and maintenance redesign. Will be with our successful contractors to make sure that we have a robust out of hours service.
Thank you.
Councillor Chamberlain.
Thank you, Chair. Hopefully just a quick clarification. Dotted through this part of the policy is the 3 asterisks not included, currently included in the service. I assume, and apologies if I missed it, that's because it's a part of the procurement activity that's going on for the future service, and therefore it's a requirement of that tender. Is that why we've called those items out?
Yes.
Councillor Murphy.
Thank you, Chairman. I've just a question around voids, and this is something raised with me by a number of residents, or technically the neighbours of residents who moved out and who had those individuals had put in fittings to a very high standard, but those were then ripped out, and there was a feeling that in terms of it was a waste of resource. And so I was really trying to understand how the policy here fits even with that, because there's an element here where not only would a very high standard of fitting be removed potentially, but the resident might actually be charged for that. And that was just, if you could sort of explain the dynamic of what you're intending here, where people have made changes.
Might be at the section in the words.
So this is section 9 voids. And it's where you've got some standard stuff you'd expect with the residents expected to remove personal effects, that sort of thing. But also residents must ensure the internal decorations of the property are restored to a moderate colour scheme on leaving, and alterations of the property are restored to the original condition. So I think I can see sort of what this is trying to achieve. I've had residents raise a concern about a waste of council resources, taking out things that actually would have been of a good standard for someone to move into. But this seems to almost introduce a further concern that actually you could be, for people who've kept a house at a very high standard, for it to be charged to get to some other standard that this is requiring.
I don't think
so. Just trying to look at their fitting together.
I don't think you finished reading the sentence actually, because it says residents must ensure that alterations are restored to the original condition unless specifically agreed with the council. So I would suggest that if someone has gone in and repaired and done an improvement to the property that's higher than the standard that we would do, then that is something that we would probably discuss. And I don't run the business, but it would be sensible to say that's good. If someone's painted the wall purple, then we probably don't want to leave them purple for the next resident. I think it's a bit of common sense.
I think that's right, but I suppose it's the exercise of that. And it is residents have told me this, that they've seen things what in their view would seem to be to a high standard, and the council had been quite draconian in going in. I understand it's a balance, but actually the way we agree this policy, we might even be then charging the resident for it as well. So it's sort of, how does this work in practice and what's intended?
Yeah, my understanding is that it's often discussed with the incoming tenant at the lettings process, and when they're, excuse me, taken around to see the property. It's not something that we would insist anything that was, well maintained, that, if the incoming tenant still wish to have that decoration, carpet, whatever it is, then the negotiation would normally take place then. So.
But I suppose I'm just checking that if the resident didn't want it, then there seems to be some risk here that
but there
needs to be some intent to be able to charge the outgoing resident for it, but actually it might have been done to a high standard. I'm just trying to work out how we come up with the common sense.
If there were things there that would be very difficult for us to maintain as a landlord, then yes, that might be something that we would want them to be doing. If it's unsafe, if it's not to our spec, then that might be something that we would be looking at. Yeah, expecting to be put back.
Yeah, so I'm maybe trying to work out how to frame the question. But how often does this happen? I suppose maybe it's I've only got anecdotal experience, so therefore I don't know whether this is a common thing or actually it's reasonably rare, and I've just been unlucky with the residents I've bumped into.
The real aim of the policy is that we do find some, really shocking properties that have not been maintained and not kept up to a high spec. So we're really concentrating on, if people have damaged a property or, it hasn't been well looked after, then we would expect them to put it back as is found, as you would in, private rented accommodation. We'll have photos pre-void and we'll be able to share those photos after when they want to move out. If it's at a really high spec, then I'm pretty sure that we would use common sense and we would talk to the tenants and keep what's deemed desirable by the incoming tenant. But we would need to make sure everything is safe and part of our ongoing maintenance contracts.
Okay, thank you.
And going back to Councillor Horrell's point, I mean, if there is a disagreement, there needs to be a way to resolve it. If the tenant's moving out saying this is great and we're saying it's not pay for it, then there will be a way of resolving the disagreement between the two. I would hope that the way we would apply these policies has a modicum of common sense. We've got well-trained people who are doing the job. They're doing it to the best of their ability and for the right reasons. But, everything in life, you're going to get some disputes somewhere. And that's why that is a valid point from Councillor Horrell, that we need that route to sort it out. But if you've got any suggestions of better wording, then we will happily take it.
Councillor Horrell.
Thank you, Chair. I just wondered on the defects number 10 on page 57, whether a good process to put in is a sort of review of new homes at a set period. So we talk about defects coming to light after the 12-month period that the tenant needs to report it. But one of the things that would be helpful, I think, for us as we build new homes is, a year on, are we reviewing the properties and saying, the builders did A, B and C, and are they working as we anticipated? Just as a good practice and learning for us as an organisation. And we may see that certain things have worked out well and some haven't. So I think that's an opportunity to learn. I worry in 9, Chair, question, Councillor Murphy mentioned the word moderate colour. I know if you were in my family, there'd be a huge dispute about what moderate colour meant, whether it was pink or blue or purple. So just over time, we want to almost, it is about common sense, but there will be some tenants who will be in disagreement about moderate colour. So we just need to bear that in mind. And also, Chair, in the planned works, we talk about the 5-year stock condition survey, but of course we're in a different cycle at the moment on our stock condition survey. So I just don't know whether the wording in that first paragraph of planned works in item 8 are sort of correct as to where we are, or whether that's our aspiration to get back to. So I know it's in a slightly strange position right now, but just to be clear for everyone. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you. I've also myself got a question on page 53 where, and it's to some extent preempts then the following paper in terms of the recharge policy, where it states at the end of page 53, the council may recharge a resident for the following. State sort of 4 or 5 items that can be recharged for. Given that we've specified the tenant's responsibilities at the beginning of the document, would it not be worth pulling more of those aspects of the tenant's responsibilities into things that we could recharge for? So there is a wider sort of list of things that potentially could be charged for, because if they are the tenant's responsibilities and they don't sort of honour them, then at the end of the day, whether it's actually during the tenancy or at the end of it, the council will become liable for actually taking on those repairs. So I'm just wondering, rather than actually having something which is potentially a subset of the tenant's responsibilities, would it be worth actually referring in that part to the tenant's responsibilities themselves? Councillor Ashwell.
They know.
And if I can just add to that, I mean that is almost a case of what was the state of the building when they took it on, and what's the state of the building when they leave it. So in private rented, you will have a check-in report which will photograph everything. I have no idea what we do with ours, but you have a point in time when it is in this state. You have another point in time when it's in that state, and that is used to measure the difference between the two. So I think there's a clear way to do that, which is in common use across private rented.
I agree with you, Councillor, and I've gone through that process myself as a private renter. So exactly that's do's and don'ts. I think it's very clearly marked, and if we do that for our tenants, perfect idea.
Thank you. I'll take that back. Thank you.
Any further questions on this particular paper? No? Okay. In that case, let's move on to the housing repairs recharge policy and take questions on that particular policy. Any Councillor Morris?
Yes, it's regarding the recharging for repairs and damage or waste when a tenancy ends. And really, sometimes the tenancy is going to end when the resident dies. Would I be right in saying that in those situations we are trying to recoup the charges from the estate? And in the absence of the estate, are we in the position of selling any belongings, or is it just the assumption that there will be an estate that can recharge this, and if we can't find an estate, we write it off?
Yes, we would. Yeah.
That's Ashwell.
Thank you, Chair. I'm not too sure whether we have covered the code of conduct for the contractor, but I have a comment on that. And this is an experience. If the work spans days rather than one single day, then it needs to be made sure that the tenant knows what's going to happen tomorrow or day after tomorrow. I didn't see that in here, but I think it should be definitely informed by the contractor to the tenant. It happens, okay, the chappie doesn't show up the next day. Who is going to be responsible for that? And I'm sure you would have come across that experiences before. And we had to rush for finding out what's happening. Thank you.
Okay. I've just been advised that that is in Appendix A, code of contract, contractors code on a previous policy. Yeah.
That's what I was reading.
Oh.
But then advise the residents when the work is complete. Yes, they don't follow that. And can we then go back to a contractor and take some disciplinary action?
That's, yeah, we should be contract managing works that are done. Yeah.
Okay, thank you.
Sorry, can I just ask, in terms of this particular policy, has the council had success in implementing its previous policy in terms of recharge?
No, despite having the ability to recharge set out in, as I've mentioned, the tenancy conditions and the tenants handbook, we haven't ever had the policy to be able to do so, and we need that obviously to be able to underline the work we want to do, and the process is to collect the recharges and invoice, etc. So this is new, this policy.
So in that regard, this is going to become potentially a surprise to a number of residents who may have, up until now, had an advantage of having works done or not being charged for works that they will now have to be charged for. Is that the case?
There is messages when people ring in for example, if somebody rang in and said, you know, I've mislaid my key and we need to change their locks, then we will say that we'll need to recharge for that. And we have some success where that's concerned, but it is clearly set out in the handbook, and the tenancy conditions are set very clear that what is a genuine complaint and what isn't, and you know, we now need to be able to take quite proactive action around that. I think, as Councillor Westwood said, you know, we do have a high number of repairs rung in that aren't necessarily a landlord's responsibility, and if we often have examples that are given to me where somebody wants to have a light bulb changed, and if we say we're going to charge for that, and they might say, how much is that? And we say, well, contractor might be £70 to come out, then they'll say, okay, I'll do that myself. So there are, you know, that we just need to have that policy to underline those conversations, because I think as a landlord we are rather generous with some of the repairs that we carry out.
If I can just add to that, but equally, if it's a vulnerable resident and we have got a number of those, then we will take a more lenient line on this side, and that's, I think, the way we need to run the business. So it'll be there in black and white. But if it's my mum at 89, 90 who can't do something there, then I think we will help. Because we are trying to run a service here, not a business.
That's horrible.
Chair, this is a really important policy to understand and implement consistently. And there are a lot of tenants we know who feel that some people don't look after their properties well, and I'm looking after mine perfectly well, and the person 2 doors along is not treating their property well, and there's not a fairness of our hand on each tenant, as it were, that we don't follow up. Their garden's messy, we don't actually make them clear it or charge them for clearing it. So I think there will be a lot of tenants who will be pleased to see some of this because they think it will be fair. But on that basis, we absolutely have to implement this policy. We can't, I accept that there will be times when it just would not be appropriate, but consistency of application is crucial. What are we going to do, given this is quite a new step if we're going to do it properly, to ensure that we have that and we have the right level of officer training and understanding, so that person X feels that they're treated the same way as person Y, as it were? How are we going to bring that new approach? Thank you.
Yeah, these are really the high level policies and the principles that we want to apply, but we will have to have policies underneath that, working policies for both officers and other teams to support the work. You're quite right. If we're going to recharge, we'll have to evidence that we've done what we have done to prevent it reaching how it has reached, you know, as you say, through tenancy visits, making sure that we've told them around the garden, etc. But we will also need to evidence that, you know, the fact that we've called somebody out and they've shown the damage. We won't be able to just kind of invoice and hope for the best. We will very much have to evidence, if we're going to recharge people, that we have the evidence that either they've called us out and it's not urgent, because that's another huge demand on the service. You know, we have high numbers of urgent calls and they're certainly not urgent. We're doing a lot of work with the hub around training. We have a new hub, really basically nearly a whole new team in the hub. So we're writing the policies underneath of that, the working policies, to make sure that the right questions are being asked. But if we do go out and we find out it's not an urgent repair, then we'll have to gather all that evidence. So you're quite right, we'll need to do that on all the occasions. So there will be policies and procedures underneath this for in-house and staff, and how we make the recharges and how we claim them, etc.
Thank you.
Mr. Westwood.
Yeah, which is why in my introduction I said this needs to be applied consistently and fairly across everybody. And the other point that I would raise if I was sitting over there is that this is not a policy that we can put on our website and say it's now in place. This is a policy that needs implementation across all of our tenant base very, very carefully, so that everybody thoroughly understands it. It's not just this policy, all of these need proper implementation. So that everybody understands the rules of the game and how we're playing. And it applies, I agree with all the comments around training on our side and so on. So it's not as simple as getting the wording right on here.
Councillor Murphy.
Thank you, Chair. And I sort of said this as a pre-question, I've sort of pre-warned you of a question. I'm hoping it got through actually. I think it would be helpful for me to have an idea of the sort of the level of these charges, because I know, and we all know from repairs, some things come in at the sort of cost you expect, and some could be an awful lot larger than you might think. And I'm trying to get a feel if we're going to start charging residents for things. And feel comfortable about that. Actually knowing what the order of magnitudes of some of these are would be really helpful. I'm not asking for a sort of a detailed shopping list, but it's just, are there any that are particularly expensive you might want to flag? Or are there any that you, I mean, for example, the broken entry keys. I mean, I don't know whether that's, basically I can't really guess as to how much that would be. I'm hoping it's a small number, but is it? I don't know whether it's 10, 100, or what. And I think there's quite a few things here which I've no feel for, and so it's hard to comment on the overall balance of this policy without some numbers, I suppose.
Ms. Tandy.
To give you an idea, we've estimated that broadly, if this policy was implemented next year, would save the housing revenue accounts about £50,000 a year. There'll be a range of different charges, as you pointed out, but I suppose the comfort we can give you is that in terms of if a customer asks us to do something and it's not something that we would do because it's not our responsibility, it's something that they will know in advance when they ask us before we actually commission that repair. In terms of voids, when we're recharging them, if they don't clear the property, that an officer will go and visit the property and they'll tell the customer when you leave, you have to have it cleaned. And if you don't have it cleaned, this is what we'll recharge you. So picking up the point earlier, would this be a shock to people? In the majority of cases, they'll know what liability they'll be facing before they're placed in that position. But we will make sure of that. For example, if people are moving into sheltered accommodations, communal entry door keys and things like that, we can tell people in advance, if you lose it, this is the sort of charge that you'll be faced with.
So there's the plan is to have quite a bit of information going along with these so that people can understand what's being charged. And are there any that you can see that there might be particular ones that might end up if we're like the council is doing the work, if it costs a lot more, how that is communicated to someone if they've been given an expectation and actually it's larger. I mean, or are you giving a reasonably firm quote when you say we will we will do this and it will cost X? The latter. Okay.
That's horrible.
Chair, thank you. In raising invoices, section 6, we say that the collection of outstanding rent or lease arrears is the priority. If someone then has an invoice on a recharge, which I think is absolutely the right approach to take. However, we don't want people then just thinking that you can forget the invoice because it's the other priority is the rent, which, you know, as a council, we're very good at collecting our rent and managing our arrears. So is there any conflict there, or do we just think that will just roll in and we will manage it in that whole area that we clearly have some skills in already?
Yeah, the income team have confirmed that they have the capacity, and we will be able to have an alert to them when we've raised a recharge. And as Simon said, they'll know that before the call, so before somebody turns up. So the housing hub will be very clear that this is likely to be a recharge, and then again, it's the evidence, it's the making sure that they understand that. So we will have a process, and we're working behind the scenes, obviously, with this to make sure that it goes smoothly and it certainly doesn't affect our rent performance. Thank you.
I've got a question on point 5.9 on page 69, which is where it's saying a tenant seeks consent to carry out the works themselves, that they're completed within 25 working days. It then also states that a quality check may be carried out on these repairs by the council surveyors. What or who carries the cost for that survey in terms of, you know, the check, and what criteria will we apply in terms of whether we actually have a surveyor going to check on the repairs that are being conducted by the tenants?
We do already have this process in place, so that if a tenant wants to do their own works themselves, then we've already got that in place, that they would need to send plans, so we would need to see what the works were involved, and then the surveyor will always go and check the repairs. So we already have that process in place. What we don't do is recharge for it.
Yeah, I was just wondering in terms of so we're doing a quality check for what purpose in terms of the actual work that's being done by the tenant?
We'd need to ensure it was safe and compliant.
So is there not a charge that we should be charging for that in terms of a check on the work?
That's the recharge we're going to introduce. Yes.
It's not quite clear there as to whether that's what's in. It just says a quality check may be carried out on these repairs by the council surveyors. It's not indicating that that's then it would be a part of the recharge to the tenant for that work. So all I'm asking is that could we look at actually at that as a chargeable fee for.
Can I just say, I think it does say may, because at the moment we don't post inspect all repairs. It's just not economic to do that.
Exactly.
And it wouldn't be the case if tenants, because the nature of some of these works, if they're getting someone to replace a pane of glass, we're not going to send a surveyor out to check it's the right. It's just that would be unfair on the tenant, because it will cost more than the pane of glass.
Yeah.
So I think we've got to have a balance on this.
And that's why my second question was, what criteria are we placing on those that we would send a surveyor to? So what do we have a list of the potential repairs that a surveyor would be required for, and therefore something that we could actually allocate some form of cost against? Because the surveyors themselves are actually a resource that we need to make sure that we're covering the cost of.
Tenant would have to write in and ask permission if they wanted to do some adaptations. Obviously, tenants don't, so we're not aware of all of the changes they may have carried out themselves. But I think we need to be clearer around point 5.9.
Councillor Ashwell.
What's our experience of recovering the recharges from the tenants? Out of 100 cases, have we been able to recover at least 90% of them?
We haven't, because this is a new policy to underline what's already expected of roles and responsibilities. We haven't got a robust recharging process in place at the moment.
Any further questions? Okay, let's move on to the last of the policies, the managing damp and mould policy. So, Councillor White.
So there's I think it's called AWAB's law coming out. It's quite high profile at the moment. I think it's coming into effect in October. Initially about timescales, isn't it, about damp and mould, and then rolling out to other emergency repairs. So presumably this policy, does that cover those stricter timescales that are required by that law already?
It does, and we've recently introduced a triage service on our housing hub, whereby we assess whether the housing hub officers assess whether it's low, medium or high risk, and then the response is obviously in line with that.
Morris.
Yes, regarding the causes for dampness, it's moisture released into the air through drying clothes. And obviously some residents don't have the opportunity to dry clothes outside. So whether one of the things you might do to address this issue would be providing some sort of outdoor drying facilities like washing lines, basically, so that to mitigate this problem.
The idea, the aim of the policy is to work in together with the tenant. It's very clear that, you know, we're not suggesting that people's lifestyles are the reasons for their damp and mould, but we are trying to work with them to manage that. And it can be very simple things like drying your washing in a room, but making sure you have the door open. So we're looking at lots of the window. We're looking at lots of different ways of being able to help tenants with advice and assistance, and we're looking at videos and all sorts of things to try and help people to understand how to manage damp and mould with us. Where we have communal schemes, we normally have either a laundry facility or we would have washing lines, but where it's practical, then we would have those washing lines for people to use. But when it's inside their homes, then it's just a case of, you know, trying to encourage them that they've got a window open or the heating is on at some point.
That's Ashwell.
For the private tenants, how do we empower them that they could complain about the landlord? Quite often I found the tenants are reluctant to do anything like that for molds particularly. Do we have any suggestions?
Currently, at the moment, for private sector housing tenants, then they would need to refer themselves to our private rented team, who help support people with landlords, so they can certainly do some mediation with the landlord and take action where it's necessary.
That's horrible.
Chair, I sort of endorse the action of if there are any contractors going into a property looking at anything else and they spot any damp and mould issues, that we want them to bring that information back, because they might be doing something completely different, but they may spot something that's helpful to us. Have we got the support, or will we, as we go forward with new contractors, for that to be a reality? Because obviously we know already that in some places, homes where we're insulating more, some are then creating damp and mould issues because of that greater insulation. So that whole rebalancing of all the relationships is quite important. So just to get some reassurance that because obviously this is a highly topical and very well publicised area at the moment, that we have as much going on to keep keep that dialogue going and to help people understand how they're living and impacting the property.
Yes, that will definitely be a priority within our dialogue with our tenders and our contractors and a successful contractor. Yes, damp and mould now does need to be treated just like a safeguarding issue. So all of our staffs that go into properties need to highlight that to the property services team if they come across any kind of damp and mould where they're visiting. We've also upskilled our tenancy services teams around how to, you know, a really simple thing to say to a tenant would be, well, perhaps when you go downstairs and make a cup of tea, just open the bedroom window so that air gets in and circulates, and encouraging people to use the equipment that we've put in for them, such as extractors. So we're upskilling all of our teams to make sure that it's treated in the same sort of seriousness as safeguarding. We have a commitment to visit the tenants within, you know, quick time scales, and we have a alert on our system now around damp and mould to make sure that we can collect that data. So certainly be part of our dialogue with contractors. Yeah.
And I'm aware it's possible to use some newer technology to do this as well, to remotely monitor homes, and that is something that we are seriously looking at. So, you know, if we identify homes at risk, we can do that.
Thank you.
Just a question from myself. I think on page 89 refers to performance measures of how the council will monitor and managing damp and mould. This information will be reported on a weekly basis on the council website. Just wondering what sort of systems and mechanisms we'll be using to actually capture the data for that report that we'll be putting up onto the website. And just a question, in terms of the criteria or the areas of report there, is that something that is specified legally in terms of reporting that we have to do, or are those a set of criteria that we've actually developed as a council that we feel is appropriate for our tenants and residents to know about?
No, there is a requirement for us to report on damp and mould. It's going to be, it is part of our quarterly performance card and so on. So yes, we do need to report on that, and that's through our housing management and repairs IT system. And we are trying to explore other modernising, more modern systems that we can use. And obviously, again, part of the new contract dialogue will be to see if we can link into their system. So we do need to be aware of damp and mould in our properties, yes.
All I'm saying is that is suggesting that on a weekly basis, we'll be updating the figures for each of those criteria. Is that something that our systems are capable of doing at the moment?
Chair, if I may, I think there's two things here. We can collect some of this data. I think that's probably inappropriately worded. Not every week will we be putting up performance information on the website. We will provide regular performance information on the weekly indicators on a weekly basis. So how many was done in a week, if you see what I mean. Does that make more sense than every week putting it up on the website? Because that would be quite a lot of work. So we can make that clearer in terms of how we're going to collect that information and make it available afterwards.
Thank you. Yes, because from my reading of that, it suggests that we are going to be reporting on a weekly basis, which is what it says there clearly. And unlike in a previous report where it was actually identified that this was not part of our current service because of capabilities that we do not yet have, this in this report doesn't have that sort of yeah. So I think if in terms of this rewording what we're actually going to provide, but also if some of it is dependent upon systems that we don't currently have, that should also be identified so that we're not setting us expectations about what we will be doing as part of this policy once it's then ratified through Cabinet. Thank you. Councillor Murphy.
Thank you, Chair. I think I'm trying to sort of pin down a question that Councillor was asking about the private rented centre, but I suppose I'm looking at the policy, and it's very much, I mean, from the council perspective, it's a reactive, because you're wanting the tenant to initially engage with the landlord and then the council gets involved. But I wonder whether it'd be helpful in the policy if there could be some sort of stated intent to educate, inform private tenants of the availability of this, because it is quite hard to empower and they may be just unaware that if they can't get their landlord to resolve a problem, that actually we have, the council is there to help. So I'm not quite sure where it fits, but if there could be something, and it could be part of the communication, and that in the various ways that you communicate out with the public as a whole and not just your own tenants, something that I would take great comfort if we knew that that was being regularly communicated out, maybe once a year, so that some of the most vulnerable people who are in private rented accommodation are aware of the support we can provide.
Yes, the private sector team will have a website with all of the information, and I do know that lots of people also use the Citizens Advice Bureau who refer to us. So we do work. We don't have the capacity within the private sector team to be robust in our promotion of it, but we certainly have information on websites and leaflets that we can give out. But we are very reliant on people, coming directly to us. We simply don't have the same resources.
I really appreciate the regular council and emails, for example, that we get. And it's if we could be taking sort of some form of initiative. I understand the constraints to get out and communicate. It's a particularly vulnerable group.
I'm happy to take that back to the private sector team.
Thank you.
Yeah.
Anything further? Okay. Just a general question in terms of these policies. Certainly, it was indicated that the housing repairs recharge policy is a completely new policy. Of the other three, when were they last updated? And is there a plan to have a regular review of all of these policies on an ongoing basis?
Normally, we would review policies every 3 years is an average, but we will also obviously react. We want them to be live documents. We will react to any government or local policy changes or any changes that we may come across with our new contractor, etc. So we will update them, but on the whole, we review every 3 years.
So is it worth within each of the policies having the last date at which it was reviewed and was then signed off by Cabinet, so that it's quite clear on each of the policies within that 3-year period that needs to be reviewed again? I just think in terms of, sort of from a sort of commercial background that I've been in, where you have documents that you want to manage, then there's a statement on the document itself as to when the next review process is going to be, so that everybody understands that, and it's then quite clear to everybody when it's then coming due for that renewal process. So I just wonder if it's something that we might be able to implement on these policies on a wider basis that makes it then clear to everybody what the review is going to be.
And actually, it is quite usual to have in policies that you will be reviewing it and monitoring it. So we can add that paragraph at the end with the,
Thank you very much. Okay, then I suggest that we move into debate. Debate that covers then all 4 of the policies that we've given questions and feedback to the team this evening. So is there any debate that members would like to contribute? Councillor Chamberlain.
Thank you, Chair. So we heard with the introduction, it's kind of the opportunity to update and refresh the policies, and so we've heard that indeed obviously there's a new policy within this. We've also heard kind of, should we say, some of the perhaps some of the challenges we have at the moment in terms of, for example, the triaging of kind of emergency requests that are called in at the moment. Councillor Horrell, in a way, beat me to a question that I was going to raise, but I figured I'd make the point through debate, which is, it does strike me that there's almost kind of a mini training needs that sits behind this internally, to make sure that collectively the council staff are kind of aware and appraised of what is, in some cases, quite fundamental change, to therefore ensure that the policy is applied consistently, both internally, but obviously more importantly with residents. So that that has come up, I think, in a few different ways through the conversation. You know, as Councillor Westwood said, it's not just a case of having the policies available on the website or sat on a bookshelf. The value will come from this as to how can we get them consistently applied across council.
Any further debate? Councillor
Chair, thank you, and thank you for the opportunity to look at these policies in detail, because I hope that we've added some value to the officer team and the portfolio holder. I welcome the commitment from Councillor Westwood to actually continue the consultation process with tenants, because I think we need to really get them on side with where we're heading on these various policies, particularly where they're newer than others. And also, clearly, we've got a set of KPIs that will come out of this. We've got a new set of regulator KPIs to deal with, but here there are some key measures that will help us to track whether we're doing well. And yes, as I said earlier, and Councillor Chamberlain's just sort of reinforced, that training and that consistency of application is going to be really important, because I think if everyone feels there's a fair game for all tenants and it's reasonable, then we will get into the mode of the new policies, and we will be able to work them effectively. But consistency will be crucial, otherwise that will cause issues. And as I said earlier, I would just ask you to look at the appeals process, not just the council's appeals process, but appeals process for some of these policies, which is easy for tenants to access and understand, and reasonable in its outcome. Thank you.
Councillor Morris.
Yeah, I just one point for discussion is picking up on what the cabinet member said earlier regarding emergency repairs, where he assured us that if there is unsafe electrical apparatus which poses a threat to life or belongings, that should be considered as an emergency repair. And it's not currently on the list, so I just would like it to be considered to be added to that list as an emergency repair in a situation where it endangers life or belonging only. Thank you.
Councillor Murphy.
Yeah, I mean, so thank you for yeah, Mr. Chair. Thank you very much for putting these together and bringing them here. I mean, it's very useful. I think it's, you know, not just the benefit of being consistent, but actually I think it should hopefully improve the efficiency and effectiveness of for resolving disputes and all of those elements. I think where it comes around again, it would be very useful, as this issue around quantification of them, but actually certainly what would be helpful for me if we're as they go next time around the loop, at which point would be one through your consultations, which ones were sort of accepted across the board by tenants, and which were the ones that were contentious, so that so if you could sort of flag those up to us in any presentation, so we can understand which are the ones we can focus our efforts on. As I mean, in the end, as you implement this, for us as council, actually dealing and supporting residents, actually understanding where they've come from and why. For the most difficult cases will be really helpful.
Thank you, Chair. I know for sure the policies must have been in place earlier on, but this is the groundbreaking exercise we are doing, really, to have all those 4 policies in one place so that everybody has access to at least a standardized way of doing it. We got bringing consistency whoever is the resident, whether it's the resident A or B or C, as Council was pointing out, that further down the road somebody is not looking after his garden. All that can be now put down into the policy, and we can point it to that. So that will be a fantastic way of progressing further. And as Mr. Hendy said, it probably will bring in some savings to the HRA as well, which is in the right direction as well. So I congratulate all of the team who have put together the policy together. Thank you.
Thank you. And yes, I'd just add my thanks to the team in terms of bringing these policies together. It certainly helps in terms of providing clarity, both in terms of the responsibility of our tenants, but also the responsibility and expectations that they can have of us as a council, and to ensure that we then implement those equitably and sort of consistently across our sort of community, means that we then have a clear reference back to which we can take our tenants if there are issues. I would echo Councillor Horrell in terms of the appeals process, because I think this, particularly the recharge policy, as it's a new policy and hasn't been implemented previously, is going to be a situation where many tenants have actually in the past taken advantage of the council and have actually used a service which actually they should have been being charged for, and now as part of this policy they are going to be. So we need to be quite clear about how that is going to be implemented. And I've got a feeling that some of that will then result in appeals and a challenge to this as a new policy. So I think actually having an appeals policy which is actually watertight and actually refers across the policies that we're putting in place here actually is quite critical, so that we are reassured that when, as I anticipate there'll be pushback from tenants about the implementation of these, as I say, particularly the recharge policy, that we are in a clear position about how we actually then resist those challenges that I anticipate will actually come to that particular policy. And I welcome the fact that we are, in terms of these policies, actually now going to be reviewing them on a regular basis. I know that that's obviously sort of for the expectation in the past, but by having it clearly stated on the actual policy itself when it was actually implemented, and with a date for then it to be reviewed, I think that will actually help the council make sure that it's managing those policies on an ongoing basis. But thank you all very much for bringing the work to us, and look forward to its progress through the next committees and cabinet, and would like to have a review back at this committee in a year after we've actually implemented it, just to see what the actual situation is with regard to the implementation. So, but in the meantime, very much thank you for the work and the presentation to the meeting tonight. Thank you. I might use that. Just that this is the last of our meetings for this municipal year. The committee will convene again next year in 2025-26, and the dates that we have are as follows: the 2nd of July 2025, the 16th of September 2025, and 25th of November 2025, and then into 2026, I'm assuming. It's the 24th of February. I've got to go back in time. So thank you all for your time and contribution to the meeting this evening, and the meeting closed at 8:45 this evening. Thanks very much.
Thank you.